Hello everyone and welcome. In this video we're going to talk about the Sun Ingress in Pisces, and we're also going to look at the charts of the new moon and the full moon. So let's jump right into it. In this picture you can see a representation of the season, winter. In fact, we have the three zodiac signs of winter. We have Capricorn, Aquarius, the heart of winter, and finally, here we go, Pisces. So Pisces is a mutable water sign, and it is placed at the end of the season. So it's very interesting to see how the season, which is cold and really wants us to focus more on our inner life, is going to end with a water sign. It's interesting since water is the element of winter. And in general, from an hermetic perspective, we can understand water as a cold and damp element. And this means that, especially with this quality cold, it means that we are called to withdraw, to focus more on our inner world, so to speak. And in this image, you can see what, in my opinion, is a representation or a perfect representation of Archangel Gabriel. Gabriel being ruled by the moon. Here it is. This is, of course, due to an anthroposophical perspective, but also in the tradition, in the spiritual tradition of the West, Gabriel is associated with the water element, and water is associated with winter. So this association also is confirmed by Agrippa. So moving on, let's talk a little bit about this mutable water, because this is important. So in general, water is the element of emotions. And as a matter of fact, Pisces is an extremely emotional zodiac sign. And mutable is the modality of change. Now, this makes sense because since this is the last zodiac sign of winter, the goal of mutable signs in general is that of bridging us from one season to the next. And so for this reason, mutable is a modality associated with change in general. But we can see this mutable water also in nature because a damp weather is coming back. And water is very unstable at the end of winter because the temperature is rising, and we can see the cycle of water taking place again with rains. We have frost in the morning. We have really this water element changing its shape and pointing us to this cycle of water, to the ability of water to change shape basically and to adapt to new situations. And as a matter of fact, water in Pisces is definitely the protagonist, and we can see that also by looking at the modern ruler of Pisces, which is Neptune. Of course, we're going to talk about Jupiter as well, since Jupiter is the main and classical ruler of the sign. However, water is definitely present in Pisces, not only from an elemental perspective, but also in terms of planetary rulership. And the image of course, the fishes is definitely pointing at the element of water. And it's interesting to see these two fishes in the constellation, one facing the new, what's next, and one turning back and looking at what has been so far. And this image is very important because the very task of Pisces is looking back to see everything that happened with the sun crossing all the 12 zodiac signs, because Pisces is the last zodiac sign. And this is important to understand the task of this sign, since Aries, the following sign, is the first sign, and Pisces is the last one. So Pisces wants to look back and really summing up everything that happened so far in order to create a synthesis and to to create a new seed for the future that the other fish is looking towards. And so I was thinking about this image. This is a scene, the ending scene of the film, The Never-Ending Story, where the protagonist, Bastian, is given a grain of sand by the childlike empress, this goddess, basically. So she's given the seed to Bastian, and what Bastian is going to do, since the world has ended, he is going to recreate all the world by the very power of his own imagination. And this is very powerful. It is an image also very appropriate, the image of the seed, to understand Pisces. And we're going to talk a little bit more about it, looking at the chart of the new moon happening on February 20th. That's going to be the last new moon, or the last lunation cycle of the year, in the very last zodiac sign. So definitely a very strong symbology. So we have the seed, we have the power of imagination, especially because Pisces is all about imagining something new, imagining a new reality. This has to do, of course, with creativity, art, fantasy, with the sublime, with the romantic, and also with a connection with the divine. And of course, on the negative side, this may become escapism. So basically, you don't want to have anything to do with this reality anymore. But this makes sense, because with Pisces, the feeling is like the world is ending. So you really don't want to invest your energy, invest your attention in a cycle, in a world that is definitely going to end very soon. This is the general feeling of Pisces. But here we find the exaltation of Venus. Venus in Pisces is an exaltation, so definitely very dignified. Venus being the goddess of beauty, she is in charge of this creative process, right? That is going to, through imagination, to create something new, a new reality that we start visioning in our mind. Okay, so let's take a look at the chart of the ingress of the sun in Pisces. The sun is down here. This chart is for February 18th, 2023, and it is domiciled in Rome. Of course, you can ignore the houses if you're not in Central Europe time, but we're definitely going to highlight points that are always valuable or valid for almost everywhere you are on Earth. So the first thing that I want to address is this conjunction, the Saturn-Sun conjunction, because as you can see, stepping into Pisces, the Sun is leaving behind Saturn, and by doing it, what the Sun is doing is a gesture similar to what we have seen talking about the ingress of the Sun in Aquarius. So back then, the Sun was leaving behind the planet Pluto, so it was leaving behind darkness, the darkness of the season, and this was definitely the case since we discussed about Aquarius and how Aquarius is basically a zodiac sign that is, it is an air zodiac sign associated with the light ether, or the light coming back, the light of the new year coming back. But now the Sun is leaving behind the cold of the season, represented, of course, by the Lord of Winter, by Saturn, right? And so this is a separating conjunction, and the Sun is leaving behind this cold, and it is entering in this state where we have this more liquid element. And the image that I see here is that of a block of ice, also preventing us from going on, from embracing the new coming, really melted down by the power of the Sun. And as a matter of fact, this conjunction has perfected when the Sun was in Aquarius, And the sun is very powerful, and it can burn down the planets. We talk about combustion in astrology, and the sun was in a zodiac sign ruled by Saturn. So definitely a balanced conjunction between two very powerful planets. In fact, Saturn is also called the cold star, whereas of course the sun is the hot, the warm star. But this is what the chart immediately introduces us to, this picture of leaving behind cold, leaving behind what is blocking us. And speaking of Pisces, the second planet that we need to look at immediately is Jupiter, since Jupiter is the ruler of Pisces. And so Jupiter is in Aries, which is the zodiac sign representing the beginning of spring. So there is this very beautiful image. We have on one hand Saturn blocking us, bringing us to this more wintry energy, right? Whereas Jupiter is ahead, is already in Aries, and Aries, as we know, is a very powerful zodiac sign, full of energy, full of fire. So Jupiter is like calling the sun, and of course Jupiter is the ruler of the sun in this case. It is like Jupiter is calling the sun to the future, to the new cycle here. And here in Pisces, we also find this beautiful conjunction, the Venus-Neptune conjunction that perfected back on not Valentine's Day, but the following day, so February 15. And this conjunction is a beautiful one because we already talked about Venus in Pisces, and in the previous image you saw the importance of Venus in Pisces in terms of imagination, fantasy, creativity, art. She's the goddess of beauty. But here, Venus is also the goddess of universal love, right? And this universal love becomes a sort of divine love with the presence of Neptune, which is also called the higher octave of Venus. And so here, what we have definitely is mysticism as a spiritual impulse. So we can move on now, trying to understand better these spiritual impulses. And in order to do so, what I like to do is taking into account another level. So we are going to zoom out this chart, and we're going to embrace the constellations as well as a new level. So we have our tropical zodiac here in the middle. We have our chart. We just zoomed out. And then here we have the constellations. And so what the constellations provide is a higher perspective that embraces spiritual hierarchies that are even higher than those in charge of the tropical zodiac, namely the second spiritual hierarchy. And we're going to try to understand better what these spiritual impulses are all about. And if you are interested in learning more about this approach that explores suggests something, a deeper understanding of what's going on from a more spiritual perspective, you can check my article about the three zodiacs down below in the description. So our Saturn-Sun conjunction, as you can see here, is taking place with the constellation of Aquarius behind it, and we're going to talk more about it in a minute. And here our Jupiter is dwelling in the very center of the constellation of Pisces, which is definitely a very important constellation nowadays because we are in the so-called age of Pisces. We're not yet in the age of Aquarius. I'm going to talk about it briefly later on, but let's start from our conjunction. So this is our representation of the sky from a simulation of a telescope. This line is Pisces, as you can see, the tropical sign of Pisces. So the sun is here, just entered Pisces, and Saturn is down here, right? So the sun is on the leg of Aquarius. This is like a man with this container of water pouring the waters that are this line, right? So last time, if you recall the last video about the sun ingress in Aquarius, we saw that Saturn was around here, sitting on the tail of the fish goat, of the goatfish, and close to this star. The star is called Deneb Algedi, which is the very tail of the goatfish. So let's talk about this constellation now, Aquarius, because as you can see, Saturn is entered officially in the constellation of Aquarius. We can tell by its position. As you can see, constellations are more nuanced. They are not, well, you definitely, with the sidereal zodiac, you can divide them in 30 degrees portions, sectors. But what we're doing here is actually trying to look at the stars and the planet where they are inside the constellations. So it's a more three-dimensional approach, so to speak. But here, Saturn is definitely transitioning towards this sign, Aquarius. And this is very important. Why? Because Saturn is a planet that is very slow. And among the heavenly spheres, that of Saturn is the highest for the planets. And beyond that, we have the sphere of the fixed stars. So from an anthroposophical perspective, Saturn represents the threshold of the lower regions of the spiritual world, the threshold between the lower region and the higher region, also called the lower Devachan and the higher Devachan. So Saturn is a planet of threshold, definitely. So it is very important because all the spiritual activities coming from the highest spiritual hierarchies, they enter our system through this door, through the door of Saturn. So it is very important to see at what spiritual impulse Saturn is pointing at. And the constellation of Aquarius has definitely a specific spiritual impulse. It is bringing a spiritual impulse connected to star wisdom, the wisdom of the stars. Now, why is that? Because all the constellations, they can be associated to a specific spiritual hierarchy and a choir of angels. Now, for instance, talking about the constellation of Capricorn, we were discussing about the seraphims. And with the constellation of Aquarius, we are concerned with the cherubims. Now, the cherubims are also called the spirits of harmony in spiritual science, in anthroposophy, and they are the spiritual hierarchy that creates the so-called music of the spheres, this harmonious movement, or this harmony between all different spiritual impulses. So in that regard, they can represent all the zodiac, because the zodiac is precisely a representation of very different perspectives, very different spiritual impulses that are in the end one. They become one, a single harmonious oneness. And so in this regard, the cherubims are definitely the spiritual, the choir of angel representing best star wisdom. So having Saturn entering this sign is definitely something that should point our attention more and more, especially in these 2-3 years where we find Saturn transiting through this constellation. We should pay more attention to the wisdom coming from the stars. And this series of video goes in that direction. Now, talking about the sun, as you can see, the sun is sitting on the leg of this human figure, which is Ganymede. In the Greek myth, he was transformed by the god Zeus, who was Jupiter, right? He was transformed into this constellation, becoming immortal. And this is very important because Ganymede was kidnapped by Jupiter, and he became the cupbearer of the gods on Olympus. And as you can see, the sun here is pointing at the leg, which in the melothesis, the association between the parts of the body and the zodiac is Aquarius, right? And so this is something that can definitely tell us something about Ganymede, Jupiter, and again, Jupiter as the ruler of Pisces. There's a connection here between the constellation and the myth behind it, and the zodiac sign of Pisces, the tropical Pisces. So in this picture, you can see this eagle, which is the animal of Jupiter. So Jupiter transformed into this eagle, kidnapping Ganymede because he was beautiful, and he brought this guy in on Mount Olympus, and all the gods were very happy because he was very good looking and beautiful. And of course, Hera, Jupiter's wife, was not as happy, but this is of course a symbol for a spiritual process of elevation, because we have the eagle, that is basically Jupiter, who metamorphosized in this animal, taking the human soul and enlighten it, bringing up towards the gods. And this is what we can do by looking at the stars and by looking at this wisdom coming from the stars that are a representation of the gods, basically, or they are a trace in the physical world of the actions of the gods. So let's talk about Jupiter. As you can see, Jupiter is in both, can be understood, Jupiter, in two ways: in a spiritual way by looking at the constellation, and by looking at the zodiac sign of Pisces. Jupiter is definitely a planet that takes all this emotional drive in the zodiac sign of Pisces, bringing it towards the sublime, towards the divine. And Jupiter is here in Aries. This is a very important line. This line is a representation of the beginning of Aries. And this means that this spot here is the spring equinox. It is an extremely important point because this point is the point that is capable of telling us where we are in terms of spiritual development. So this point moves very slowly, going backwards, and this is called we have the equinoxes moving backwards. So they are preceding more and more. So this point is moving backwards, and it is pointing at the constellation that is referring to the age that we are currently living in. So this is the spiritual age of Pisces, because the vernal point, 0 degrees Aries, tropical Aries, is pointing at this constellation. And where is Jupiter? As you can see, it is in the very middle of the constellation of Pisces. And this is very important because we are in the age of Pisces. So let's talk a little bit about this. Now, Pisces is, as a zodiac sign, as a tropical sign, we can understand it in the soul because it has this tendency of escaping reality, of, going towards the inside as a water sign. So it's like detaching itself from a world that it is ending. But this gesture can be understood also in a spiritual way. And the gesture, the spiritual gesture in this case, is that of the spirit, like detaching from nature, contemplating nature, and understanding all the laws of nature. It is basically the abstract mind that separates from the senses, and this is the prerequisite for science. So with the vernal point pointing at the constellation of Pisces, what we have is the spiritual impulse of science itself. And this can also, this impulse, according to Steiner, started in the 15th century, and we are now in the epoch of the conscious soul, and we are supposed to develop more and more science. And now science has developed a lot, but has reached a critical point because science is only concerned with matter. And this is not wrong, of course. It's the beginning of the spiritual impulse, but we need to move on and to develop another form of science that is not limited to the spiritual world, but also expands, containing the inquiries that are researching the human soul and the human spirit as well. And this is what Jupiter, which is a very spiritual planet, is all about here. So this is very important because on one hand, we have this impulse of science, materialistic science, right? But on the other, especially because we're going towards a better understanding of the star wisdom, of the wisdom coming from the stars, what we're supposed to do is developing more and more the spiritual science, and of course, anthroposophy goes in this direction. Now, the beautiful conjunction between Venus and Pisces, this is very interesting because as you can see, it's happening in the constellation of Pisces, but at the same time in the tropical sign of Pisces. So here we have a residue of the, not ancient, but of the impulse of mysticism of the previous cultural epoch, and this is about, you know, the mystics of the Middle Ages, basically. So this impulse of mysticism is still here. It is a residue, meaning that it is going to be more and more replaced by this scientific impulse with spiritual experiences that are more precise and that are less blurry, less based on divinity, because what mysticism does is connecting us to the divine on an emotional level, or through the member of the human soul that is feeling, right? So what we need to do is approaching the spiritual world, transforming our thinking and spiritualizing our thinking so that it can become an organ of clairvoyant perception. And this is what anthroposophy suggests, of course. And it is a very powerful impulse. And in my opinion, it is going to grow more and more. So this configuration means that with the head of this fish, we still have the opportunity to have some mystical experiences, but we should definitely embrace the new at the same time, right? So let's take a quick look at the calendar for February and for March. Starting from February 18th, we have our Sun Ingress in Pisces. Then we have on February 20th, the first CGZ, the new moon, happening at the same time with the planet Venus entering Aries. So a very uncomfortable transitioning for Venus, because she's going to pass from Pisces, the place of her exaltation, to Aries, which is the sign of her exile, right? So not exactly ideal for the planet of love. And moving on to March, we have, of course, the elephant in the room. The elephant in the room is the ingress of Saturn in Pisces, March is super intense because this transit is happening together with the full moon in Virgo. It really depends on where you are on Earth. For instance, here, as you can see, first off, we're gonna have on March 7th the full moon, in Virgo, and then after that, just not a couple of hours, but during the same day, we're going to have this important transit, and we're going to talk about it in a dedicated video. And of course, it's worth mentioning the other super important ingress that we're going to have on March 23rd, Pluto entering Aquarius, and this is huge. Pluto is going to stay in Aquarius for 3 months, but this allows us to really get a preview of what's coming with this transit, because when Pluto is going to enter Aquarius for good, it's going to stay there for 20 years or so, so definitely a major shift. We are not going to talk about it since this is going to happen with the ingress with the new astrological year, basically. So we're not going to address it in this video, but definitely we're going to talk about it in a dedicated video. What else? We have this busy day, March 16, but after that we have the second, the second CGZ. No, I just mentioned that it's happening on March 7th. Yes. So moving on, let's talk about the new moon in Pisces, happening on February 20th. This chart is domiciled for Rome. But as you can see here, what we have is a configuration that is pretty much similar. This event is happening just 2 days after the ingress of the Sun in Pisces. And we have something quite unique, in my opinion, here, because there's a triple conjunction between Sun, Moon, and Saturn. But apart from that, we have this image of the seed that I mentioned before, because the new moon is the very beginning of the lunation, when the solar seed impregnates the moon, right? So we have the image of the seed here of a new cycle. And this is going to be the last lunar cycle of the astrological year. And it's happening in conjunction with Saturn. And what's interesting is that Saturn is it's like covering this seed in the ground. It's like if Saturn was this piece of dirt covering this seed that is going to take everything that Pisces can do. So as we said, Pisces can really summarize all the journey excuse me, all the journey of the sun through the zodiac signs, and it can prepare this new seed. So we have this powerful image here. And the rest of the chart is more or less very similar to what we discussed about. And the only difference is Venus, that, for instance, here is sitting on the anaretic degree, the 29th degree, the last degree of Pisces, a very uncomfortable place for Venus to be, because it's like knowing that, like, she's going to pass from a very dignified placement to the place of her exile. So this Venus is like on the threshold, right? So it's like the chart is suggesting us to not linger too much in a spiritual impulse that has to do with feelings, but to move on in areas where Jupiter is. And the conjunction between Jupiter and Venus is going to take place on, let me check real quick here. Yeah, it's here on March 2nd. And this is a beautiful conjunction between the two benefics that in a way is also, as we're going to see, summarizing the zodiacal virtue of the month. So, but here it really depends on where you are. Maybe in your case, the new moon is going to take place with Venus that just entered Aries, but the taste is similar. You are about to change, or you just change into something that you don't really like anymore, but we need to move on, right? This is the image that I can see here. And moving on to March 7, we have the chart of the full moon in Virgo down here. And from the picture, you can see that the moon is like the focus point of the chart, because the moon is counterbalancing all these planets that are mainly the planets here in Pisces, because the planets in Pisces, and we're going to have 4 of them, are about emotions, escapism, escaping reality, but the moon in Virgo is very grounded. So it's like the image of the moon here is collecting all the lights of the cosmos, and it is bringing them down on Earth to realize the spiritual impulses down on Earth. And on top of that, we have another planet on the anaretic degree, on the last degree of, in this case, of Aquarius, because we have Saturn sitting on the very last degree of Aquarius. And it's precisely like Venus, like Saturn is moving on to Pisces, where it doesn't have that dignity that it used to have for 5-6 years now, because Saturn is the ruler of Capricorn and the ruler of Aquarius. And it is a very slow-moving planet, meaning that Saturn has been in his zodiac signs for many years now. And so this shift is going to be huge, because it means that we're not going to have a very strong Saturn anymore. And this comes with tension, of course, and we can see this tension in this T-square between the luminaries and the planet Mars. But first, I wanted to talk about the triple conjunction that we saw in the new moon and how it metamorphosized, because this chart is featuring another triple conjunction. It is a wide triple conjunction between the Sun, Neptune, and Mercury, whereas in the previous chart we saw that the conjunction was between the luminaries, Sun and Moon, together with Saturn. But here we have this water element, this fluidity coming from the planet Neptune and the conjunction with the Sun. And we have this image of Mercury really getting in the way and separating, so to speak, the Sun and Saturn. And this image is pretty strong, because Mercury is pretty debilitated here. So I picture this Mercury as a sort of hero trying to divide the Sun and Saturn, or since Mercury is a very dynamic planet, like helping the Sun to get rid of this rigidity coming from Saturn. And in my opinion, this Mercury, it looks like a hero, because Mercury in Pisces is very weak, is in the place of his exile and fall. It is receiving this combustion from the Sun, so the Sun is burning this Mercury. And on top of that, we still have a wide conjunction, dissociated conjunction between Mercury and Saturn. And this means that on top of that, we also have the conjunction with a malefic planet. So this Mercury is like, it is almost sacrificing itself to get things, well, not started yet, but definitely less stagnant, more dynamic. And this, all this water, all these emotions are, can be dramatic. because we have too much water. We are forming a stellium of water in Pisces, a stellium immutable water. So I think that the 2 weeks from this full moon in Virgo to the next new moon are going to be quite emotional. And I can tell also by the planet Mars closing the opposition between the luminaries in a T-square configuration. So this already happened back, if you remember, during the last full moon in Leo. It was happening on February 5th, but we had the planet Uranus, which is, of course, a very challenging planet because it can be, about revolution, about sudden change. It can bring a very unstable energy, as Mars can be, right? Because Mars is the god of war. So definitely we have some emotional turbulence also brought by Mars. And Mars in Gemini, we discussed about it again and again. Mars in Gemini on a collective level brought so many things like market war, financial speculation, also propaganda, and it has to do with what's happening in the world when it comes to, the supply chain crisis, all the natural resources lacking due to the eclipses in the Taurus Scorpio axis, right? So definitely a planet that we focused our attention on many times. And the last one that we mentioned, Mars, it was due to the conjunction between the Neanderthal comet and Mars, and this conjunction took place actually. So the comet was also activating Mars. So we're going to see what's going to happen when Mars is going to enter Cancer, because Cancer is the place of Mars's fall. And usually what happens when Mars has been retrograde for several months in Gemini with all these financial speculation, you have the fall of the market when Mars enters Cancer. So I don't want to be dramatic. It's just something that we need to be aware of, because we had all this financial speculation for months now, and so something has to happen, right? And we can time that with Mars entering Cancer. Now, I want to briefly refer to the virtue of the month. This was the virtue of Pisces given by Elena Petrovna Blavatsky, and confirmed and also expanded by Steiner with this other virtue. So we have magnanimity becomes love. Now in Pisces, we have both these qualities. We have magnanimity, so which means the soul is great, the greatness of the human soul, the virtue of forgiveness, or the virtue of giving ourselves to other people to help them out, right? And this is Jupiter, whereas love, universal love, is, of course, Venus. Okay, that's all. Thanks for watching. If you like this video, please consider subscribing to the channel and to activate the notification bell. Also, like this video and share it with people interested with astrosophy, and see you next time.